This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the Holistic Survival Show with Jason Hartman. The economic storm brewing around the world is set to spill into all aspects of our lives. Are you prepared? Where are you going to turn for the critical life skills necessary to survive and prosper? The Holistic Survival Show is your family's insurance for a better life. Jason will teach you to think independently, to understand threats, and how to create the ultimate action plan. Sudden change or worst case scenario, you'll be ready. Welcome to Holistic Survival, your key resource for protecting the people, places, and profits you care about in uncertain times. Ladies and gentlemen, your host, Jason Hartman.
So what are we here at Rebel Capitalist for? Well, we're here to talk about enhancing our freedom, protecting our freedom, all of that good stuff. But we're also here to talk about our financial lives and making money, right? How many people like that? Let's talk about making money. Let's talk about some of the world's best investors. And let's see if we can learn from some of the world's best investors. Now, there are many others that aren't pictured here, right? But let's just talk about a few of them real quickly, okay? And let's look at their returns and see if we can come close to their returns or even beat their returns in terms of ROI, return on investment. So, Jim Simons, how many of you are familiar with Renaissance? This is the most successful hedge fund, and his returns are phenomenal. He's a math genius, and he really figured out the market. So, 39% last year. Pretty phenomenal, right? Okay, what about, you all know Ray Dalio? Maybe you've read some of his books. They're good. 34% last year. I mean, these are the world's best investors with the highest return on investment. How about Bill Ackman? 27% last year. Pretty phenomenal. But I'm saving the best for last. The person we really need to emulate, without a doubt, the world's best investor. Who do you think it is, folks? It is Nancy Pelosi! This is definitely the world's best investor. 65% return on investment, this criminal. I mean, unbelievable, 65%. There is an account on X. I'm not calling it Twitter, it's X. Aren't you glad Elon bought it? There's some place that has free speech left, right? Yeah, give a hand for Elon for sure. On X, there is an account called Pelosi Tracker. I think it's called Pelosi Tracker, and it tracks all of her crooked investments with insider information and so forth. And when Twitter was under the old regime, they banned that account multiple times. But now, with Elon in charge, someone who actually has some principles, and I'm not saying Elon's perfect by any means, he's not, but at least, it is a freer place. That account remains, so it's great. All right, so big question in real estate and in the economy everybody's talking about is there a bubble, right? How many people think there's a bubble? How many people thought there was a bubble in 2015, 2019? During COVID, certainly, you thought everything was going to crash and there would be a bubble for sure, right? And, this bubble discussion really isn't as simple as it appears. Because as humans, we make a lot of mistakes in our thinking. But one of them is definitely the idea that just because something was a certain way, that it has to revert back to the certain way. Okay, so, if you're looking at a chart, there are a whole bunch of people in the stock world that analyze charts, the chartists, right? The technical analysis people, and they analyze charts and they look for, support levels, right? Where if the asset reverts to a certain amount, it's going to be at a support level. It might break through higher or break through lower, that all can happen. And people do this with real estate, and that is a mistake because real estate is not a fiat asset like stocks. Stocks really are fiat, like fiat money. Now, fiat, of course, means by authority, by decree. The dollar is valuable because they said it was, right? That's fiat. There's no limit to the amount of stocks that can be created. That's a paper asset, just like dollars. But real estate, or especially, I should say, improved real estate, especially housing, which is what I'm a specialist in, is a very sticky asset, and it's very difficult to produce more of it. And that's a great thing when you own it, because it is very difficult to produce. So maybe you've heard this old riddle, okay? And the riddle goes like this, what do you call a developer, right, who wants to build properties? Someone who wants to build a house at the beach or in the woods, right? That's a developer. They want to build something. What do you call an environmentalist? Someone who already has a house at the beach or in the woods, right? Because as long as they've got theirs, they don't want anybody else building anything else, right? This NIMBY, not in my backyard, hypocrisy, it's all over the place. But it is very hard to produce new improved property. There's all kinds of restrictions. It's super difficult. And it's not just land use restrictions, which thankfully are opening up a little bit. There's a lot of push to do this. But it's also just the restrictions of the commodities. I have a strategy I've been teaching for 20 years. It's called packaged commodities investing. And what it really talks about is how I don't love real estate. What I do love is commodities, the ingredients of real estate. Concrete, glass, steel, copper wire in the walls, tons of petroleum products, lots of energy that it takes to build a house, right? All of these things are in limited supply. They're commodities that are traded globally. Every human being on earth needs all of these commodities, the lumber, all of these ingredients of a house, right? And they have intrinsic value, because it doesn't matter if they're traded in the yen, the euro, the dollar, the peso. It doesn't matter. The value is pretty much the same worldwide. And so these commodity assets, when packaged in the form of a house, get a special bunch of treatment and a bunch of privileges that they don't get otherwise. You can go to the commodities exchange and you can buy all these things, right? Certainly you can invest in lumber. Simon will tell you about that. You can invest in copper, right? And, that's been doing its thing lately. You can buy all these things. But the difference is when you assemble them in the form of a house, then they get all this special treatment. They get tax benefits. In fact, they're the most tax-favored asset class in America. They get 3-decade-long fixed-rate financing. And that financing is subsidized by the government. So, George this morning was talking about all these people on government assistance of, this type or another. Have you ever seen so many young, capable adults being disabled? They're all collecting disability, right, from the government. It's ridiculous, the welfare state. Well, one of my philosophies is, as the old saying goes, never bet against the Fed, okay? As the old saying goes, if you can't beat them, join them, right? And I just want to basically game the system, and I want you to do the same, by aligning your interest with the most powerful forces the human race has ever known. What are those? Governments and central banks. Don't fight them. It's not going to work. Okay? You can complain all you want, right? Everybody can complain about the government. Yes, they suck. The central banks, yes, they're evil. They're stealing our money with inflation. But what if we just align our interests with them, with their business plan, and we do that with the most historically proven asset class in the entire world, and that is income property, and the most tax-favored asset class in America, and the most debt-favored asset class in America, because that debt is such a powerful tool for creating wealth. And we all know about leverage, obviously, right? That's the simple part of creating wealth with income property. If you put, just for rough, easy numbers, you put 10% down on a property and it goes up in value by 10%, you got 100% return on investment, right? You all understand leverage. So that's simple. But what happens on the backside of that is a strategy I've been teaching for 20 years, and I actually trademarked it. It's a mouthful. It's called inflation-induced debt destruction. And that's actually how I met George, because he was listening to my podcast back in 2012, and he was talking about me on his YouTube channel, and I never heard of the guy. And one of my clients who purchased several properties around the country from us, that's what we do. We help people buy income property around the country and build portfolios. His name's Clay, and he reached out to me and he says, hey, this guy George Gammon, he has a YouTube channel. I was like, I never heard of him. And he says, well, he keeps talking about you. Maybe you should check him out. And so I ignored it. And then finally he sends me one of George's videos and he says, look, just go to this exact spot in the video, 12 minutes and 32 seconds or whatever. And I did. And he says, yeah, you should listen to Jason Hartman talking about inflation-induced debt destruction. Then I went down to Colombia and hung out with him for a few days. And, that was about 5 years ago. The rest is history. So back to this bubble discussion, okay? Are we in a bubble? Well, the first thing I want to say is that there are so many people that have this really shallow view of income property and investing. And they think it's all about this one-dimensional thing, right? They think, okay, the whole game is let's buy low and sell high. Folks, there's way more to it than that. If it was just buy low, sell high, we could just say, okay, we think it's going to go higher and we'll buy it and then we'll sell it later, right? There's way more to it than that. It's a multidimensional asset class. And so you earn your return in a lot of ways. Most investments aren't like that at all. In fact, the only other investment that is really multidimensional as much as income property is buying a business. Because a business is pretty multidimensional. There's a lot of things you can do to add value, but again, more risky, more volatile. So this whole discussion of buy low, sell high, I have to address it because everybody has been trolling me on YouTube, on my channel for a long time, and some of them are probably you guys. I know you're doing it, okay? And you're just wrong. You've been wrong, and I've been right, okay? So you. Right? But here, I'll tell you why they got it wrong. Like on the surface, it seemed like they were right. Okay, and I'm going to show you a chart in a few minutes why just all the experts just got it wrong about real estate and why I got it right, okay? Intuitively you'd think, yeah, they would have been right. When interest rates increased, there was going to be a crash. And that argument made a lot of sense. But what they were doing is they were looking at the brushstrokes on the painting when they should have backed up and saw the big picture. Okay, and the big picture shows a very different picture than that. So I'll get to that in a moment. This is a funny comic that was circulating, a couple of years ago. The woman says to the realtor, well, we'd really like to look at something, a little higher price. The realtor says, okay, I can show you this home tomorrow. Right? And that's how it was during the COVID era. And I've spoken at every Rebel Capitalist Live event that George has had so far. At the Houston event, how many of you were at the Houston event? Okay, yeah. I got COVID at that event. Did I get it from you? Or you? Or who gave it to me? Anyway, so at the Houston event, I reported that the housing inventory was the lowest ever. It was 240,000 homes for sale in the United States. And it's much higher than that now. Does that mean it's going to crash? We'll see. We'll see. Let's get into it, okay? There's an affordability crisis. How many of you think homes are affordable? No, they're not. They're much less affordable than they used to be. But again, when you step back from the painting and look at the big picture, they're more affordable than you think they are. I'm not saying they're great, but it's more affordable than it used to be, okay, and in some cases. Now, I had a request for this. I wasn't going to talk about this today, and my time is very limited, so they agreed to give me an extra hour, so I threw this in, okay? Travis, fix the clock back there, okay? So this is an index I created called the Hartman Comparison Index. And what it basically, kind of the thesis of it is this, is that many people make the mistake of valuing anything in only one comparison channel. And what I mean by that is this. When we look at real estate, we always say, okay, is it, $300,000 or $400,000? And my thesis is that is the wrong way to look at it. Because, by the way, I have these buttons outside at our collective mastermind, a collective inner circle mastermind. Come and get one. This button says, compared to what? Okay? I say this question all the time on my show, and I think it really is life's most important question. Whenever you evaluate anything in life, ask yourself, compared to what? That's life's most important question. Because the only way we really know anything as humans is by comparing it to something else. So why do we then make this mistake with real estate and we only compare it to one thing, the US dollar? There's more to the world than the US dollar. I mean, the US dollar is obviously a pretty big deal, king dollar, but there's more to it than that. So if we compare it to gold, and I'm definitely not a gold bug. Yes, I own some, sure, but I'm not a huge fan. It's, it's insurance, okay, and that's fine. But gold has been considered money for 5,000 years. So if we just compare the price of real estate to gold, it tells us some interesting things. So let's go with, 1970 when the price was controlled before Nixon in 71, right? So the median house price then was $23,000. I'm rounding, obviously. Gold was $35 an ounce. If you wanted to buy that house, it took you 654 ounces of gold to buy the median price house. Just a decade later, when we had that wild inflation of the 70s, by 1980, gold is now $653 a house, and it only takes 97 ounces of gold to buy the house. So what if you were a person in 1970 and through the 70s, every time you got a paycheck and you had extra money to invest, instead of putting your money in a savings account and being denominated in dollars, you denominated your money in gold, right? Housing got cheaper in that 10-year period to you. See, compared to what? It depends how you denominate things. So let's, look at more recent history, because that was certainly an anomaly, right? So if we look at 2020, right, you go down the chart, the median house price is now $309,000. Okay, gold is over $1,800 an ounce. It takes 164 ounces of gold to buy the median price house. Now, certainly everybody thinks in the past 4 years, housing prices have skyrocketed. They're so freaking expensive. Well, really? It's a little bit more now. It takes 177 ounces to buy the median price house. It's not much more. Okay, that's gold. Fine. Oh, well, here's the important question. George always says on his show, is it cheap or expensive, right? Ask yourself that question. And that's basically compared to what? That's a compared to what question. So based in gold, is it cheap or expensive? Well, let's look at oil, the most important commodity in the world, I would argue. In 1970, oil was $4 a barrel. Buy the median price house, you got to bring in giant truckloads of 6,400 barrels of oil to buy a house. Now, today, you can buy a house that's much more expensive. It's not $23,000. It's $400,000 now, right? For 4,700 barrels of oil. It got cheaper priced in oil. So why are we just thinking in dollars? Because hopefully none of you in this room are silly enough to be denominating your wealth in dollars, because you know for sure that if you do that, inflation is going to steal. Inflation is a liar and a thief. It's a pickpocket. It's constantly debasing the value of your savings if it's denominated in dollars. You can't trust the dollar. Well, you can trust it, actually. It's very reliable. It always goes down in value. Okay? Super reliable, actually. So you can trust it that way, but you don't want to be in that, right? So priced in oil, is it cheap or expensive, right? Well, it just depends. Okay, let's talk about inventory for a moment. And I got to hurry here because I have like 4 hours of content for you. Okay. So low inventory, right? There's all kinds of articles that'll tell you there's a housing shortage, the inventory is low, here's another one, there's another one, right? Renters are losing hope that they can ever own a home because it's just so darn expensive. Okay. A Bankrate survey last month suggested that Americans would have to earn more than $110,000 a year just to afford the median price house. Well, Americans don't earn that much typically, right? The median income for a household is only $74,000. Okay, so most people can't afford a house. Yet, interestingly, how many of you are millennials? You complainers. Millennials, I'm a Gen Xer, so I'm a little older than millennial, okay? Millennials love to complain about how housing's so unaffordable, okay? And, they're sort of right, not completely. And so they complain, and they say things like this. Look, when my parents were 30 years old, they bought a house in a nice neighborhood with a white picket fence, okay? Just the American dream type idea, right? And I'm 30 years old, and I can't afford a house. So they complain about this. But what they don't consider is the age adjustment that has to be made compared to what, right? Millennials are on the slow life plan. They're taking it easy, doing everything later. They're, coupling up later. They're getting married later. They're having kids later. They're buying a house much later. okay? They went to Europe, they became a digital nomad, they traveled around, they hung out in Bali, they screw around, okay, for a while and find themselves. And that's all great, okay? I guess you could say their baby boomer parents were taking acid at Woodstock. Okay, so, it's fair on balance. But anyway, millennials are doing everything 6 years later. So you have to compare the 30-year-old baby boomer parent to a 36-year-old millennial kid. And then they're about the same. Quit complaining, millennials. You're going to live 6 years longer, so you're just doing everything a little later, right? Okay, so that's the reality of the millennials. But just remember, income property is a multidimensional asset class. So if people move out of the buying market because it's so unaffordable, that leaves them in what? The renting market. And that puts upward pressure on rents. Now, that's not happening to any extreme degree now. Why? Because there is a glut of multifamily apartments that have hit the market and are hitting the market all this year. In fact, it's the biggest year, and Ken McElroy's up next. He'll talk about that because he's the expert in multifamily. So that is kind of suppressing the rent increases. Rents are still rising, but just not as much as they would be otherwise. Now, that problem will correct itself in 2 years, I estimate, okay? And then we will see, the reality of the upward pressure on rents. But interestingly, millennials now make up the biggest share of home buyers. I don't have a chart on this, but I have it in my head. Over the last several years, this percentage hung around, 52% of the entire housing market was first-time buyers. And the vast majority of these are millennials. Well, guess what it is now? You might be surprised at this. It's over 58%. So for all the complaining, they're buying houses. They are the biggest part of the home buying market right now. Okay, so here's how everybody got it wrong. You want to know how everybody got it wrong? Say yes. Yes, Jason, I want to know how everybody got it wrong and why you were right. Okay, here's why. When we had this historic 500 basis point increase in mortgage rates, Jerome Powell, he just screwed up so badly. He kept the money printer on for way too long. They were at the cocktail party. No one took away the punch bowl. He kept using the word, what? Transitory. Inflation. It's just transitory because of the supply chains. And he was right. There was a kernel of truth in that for a while, but he just kept thinking that and repeating that line for way too long. He should have raised rates more slowly and much sooner, but he didn't. So then the inflation beast roared, and now we have a giant problem. And the Fed, they are in a mess right now. I don't know how they can really solve it, because something like 40% of the inflation metric is housing cost. And there's a huge housing shortage. I'll show you more about that. So how do you fix that? The only way you fix it is decrease demand. Maybe you could, give people a shot in the arm and they'll die early. Okay, that might decrease demand. Or you just got to build more houses, right? One or the other, okay? And that's it. That's all you can do to solve the problem. That's it. That's the whole equation. It's just simple supply and demand. But when the interest rates went up, housing prices had already run up during the COVID era dramatically, even though everybody thought they would crash then, and they didn't. So the prices went way up. Now the interest rates are way up, and housing costs became just completely unaffordable. Sales activity declined from about $6 million a year to under $4 million a year. That's why every realtor and mortgage person and title and escrow person, anybody around the real estate industry has been complaining like crazy. They've been starving. Activity went way down. Really, really tough situation. And so what they were looking at, all the experts were saying, well, housing is so unaffordable now, and nobody will be able to buy. Okay, they're right. That's fine. But you know what they didn't look at? They were looking at the brushstrokes in the painting. They should have backed up and looked at the big picture. Here's the big picture. There's about 140 million housing units in the United States. Remember the sales volume I told you? In a really good booming year, it's like, close to 6 million a year sales. Went down below 4 million a year. Okay, so since the rates went up, only about 8 million homes have transacted, maybe a little more than that now, 9 million, call it. It's 140 million units. That means there's 131 million units where housing is not unaffordable to those people. Those people are insanely comfortable. They have 3% mortgages. They control the supply. They're not selling. We all know this, right? This is how everybody got it wrong. They simply looked at the new entrants coming into the market and said nobody can afford it. So nobody wants to sell it anyway, right? So that's the problem. So the market froze up. Now, this is changing very slowly because every time someone does a transaction, they automatically refinance because the mortgage is not portable. It doesn't go with the house or to the new buyer, I mean. So this slowly, the lock-in effect diminishes over time, and it's diminishing at a rate of about 4 million a year. But remember, we have 130 million homes to work through, and let's look at some stats on that. So everybody thought this was the problem. This chart, by the way, is the national payment-to-income ratio. When the rates went up, the payment got very high and very unaffordable. But that wasn't the issue. The issue was here, all the people that were super comfortable that had very, very low payments. Look at how low their payment is as a ratio to their income. They're super, super comfortable, and they're not selling. Okay, so Fannie Mae, at the beginning of this year, they came out with a forecast. Now, think about it. Fannie Mae is the biggest mortgage player on planet Earth, right? This government-sponsored entity. And they said that mortgage rates by the end of this year would go to 5.6%. Well, that's not going to happen. I'll just tell you, it's too late. Uncle Jerome Powell is pretty stingy with the rate cuts, as we've seen. We thought he would cut sooner, and I kind of think he should have, because I think that the bias of the Fed and the elites will always be to let the little people get screwed over by inflation and to keep, rather than break the economy. The only real history we have for when that didn't happen was with Paul Volcker, the Fed chair, under the end of the 70s and then into the Reagan era a little bit, right? He broke the back of inflation with those very high rates. But we're not going to see this year. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think it could happen by second quarter of next year. I don't know. Interest rates are impossible to predict because they're centrally planned. I don't know. But 5.6%. Let's just look at a few things. What happens here compared to what? That's always the right question. So first off, when we talk about housing inventory, it's important to understand that housing inventory needs to change and be adjusted based on the size of the population. Nobody's doing this, except me, I'll tell you, right? So I found this chart, which was hard to find, by the way. This is the total housing inventory per person. This is what matters, is the per capita number of housing inventory. And you can see it's the lowest it's been in 24 years, the per person housing inventory. All right? So here is the overall housing inventory. It's way up, but is this cause for concern? Right now, there's almost 600,000 homes for sale in the United States. But compared to what? Well, compared to normal, that's half of what it should be. Okay? There should be about 1.2 million homes for sale. But compared to the low point at Rebel Capitalist Live in Houston, it's more than double. So you can see all these sensational YouTube videos from, the Crash Bros, I love that name, the doomers that say, oh, housing inventory is skyrocketing. Yeah, sure, but compared to what? It's not even close to where it needs to be normal. And guess what? The 1.2 million number is from 2015. There were fewer people in the country. Thanks, Joe Biden, for not controlling our borders. That, and then, people have kids, right? Obviously. So that number really needs to be higher. The new normal is a higher number than 1.2 million. But inventory overall is extremely low. The normal amount is 1.2 million. Lowest, about 240,000. Okay, so let's do a little quick visualization exercise. Close your eyes and just visualize your kitchen sink, right? And I want you to visualize the real estate market this way. So the faucet is the new listings, the new homes coming on the market for sale. You walk up to your kitchen sink, it's just trickling. There's hardly anything coming up for sale because nobody wants to turn on the faucet. They don't want to give up their cheap mortgages. The basin of the sink is the existing inventory on the market. Right now, that number is less than half of what it should be to be considered normal. The drain is the demand. That's the buyers. So the drain is the buyer demand. And the Fed has definitely destroyed demand with the higher interest rates. So the drain's a little bit plugged up. During the COVID era, virtually every property that came up for sale was being absorbed. A buyer was buying it, so the drain was wide open, and the market was just sucking up every new house that came up for sale. It's not that way anymore, right? Houses are sitting on the market for longer. Sometimes they're reducing prices, but it's hardly even close to being considered a bad market. It's not even close to being considered a normal market. There's still a dramatic low supply. So the drain is about 20% clogged. That's kind of how the basin is about half full, okay, or half empty if you're a pessimist, right? Okay, so, and if it was full, that would be normal. If it was overflowing, that would be a bad market, a buyer's market, a depressed market, okay? That's the metaphor for it. Okay, so let's look at this. So we did a study on the Fed pivot and what happens when there are rate cuts. I mean, look, we all know it's coming. We just don't know exactly when. So we use 7% as the baseline mortgage rate. And we thought, okay, what if rates go down by a half point? 50 basis point drop in rates. That means that now 2.8 million new households can qualify for a mortgage. 2.8 million more. Certainly they will not all enter the market and start bidding on properties, because just because you can buy doesn't mean you will buy, okay? If it goes down to 6%, another 5.4 million can now qualify for that mortgage. If it goes down to the Fannie Mae prediction of 5.5, give or take a tenth of a point, okay, that means 7.7 million new people can enter the market and qualify for the median priced home. What did we just look at? The inventory? How much inventory is there? Say the number, 595,000. That's the number, okay? Say you just look at a half point drop and say just over a third of those people come into the market and start bidding on houses. That's 1 million new buyers in a market with only 595,000 properties for sale. And there is no market where every house ever sells. Some just will never sell. Some people are fooling around, experimenting. They're just not really serious sellers, okay? So you can see what's going to happen. It's just simple supply and demand. I mean, if we get to this point where maybe 2.5 million new people come into the market, almost a third of the number that could come into the market, what do you do when you only have 595,000 homes for sale? Now, inventory is still rising, and it's probably going to rise by another 100,000. I say we'll probably hit close to 700,000 for sale. One thing I do want to tell you, though, is that this stat, it depends who's doing the survey, okay? Because the National Association of Realtors, they do a survey as well of inventory. But the problem with their survey, and the reason I don't use it, is because it includes pending sales and contingent sales. And those homes aren't really for sale, at least not yet. These are active listings only. But if you want to use the NAR stats, just always compare apples to apples and look at what NAR said 10 years ago or 5 years ago or last year and what they say now. If you want to use these stats that are just active listings, then go with that. It's okay, either one, just apples to apples. So here's the makeup of the existing mortgages in the market. And this is why people won't sell. This is why you have a lock-in effect. 65% of the country has a mortgage at or below 4%. Almost 1/4 of the country has a mortgage at or below 3%. Here's another way to look at it, a prettier chart, same data. Okay, and you can see how few people have high-rate mortgages, right? That's really only the 9 million that traded since the rates went up, right? Those are the only people with high-rate mortgages. Credit scores, I mean, look, how many of you purchased a house since the Great Recession, since 2008? How many of you purchased a house? Okay, qualifying for a mortgage, was that easy or hard? That's a question. It was hard, right? Yeah, okay. They wanted your DNA test, your shoe size, everything. And it's like all these mortgages now, I mean, the vast majority are just very well underwritten. This is not the Great Recession with these careless mortgages with, stupid liar's loans and all that kind of stuff. People have very good credit scores that have these loans. These are well underwritten mortgages. This is the loan to value ratio, the LTV. People have equity. They have tons of equity, nothing like the Great Recession. I mean, when you look at this one, right? Over 69% of borrowers have a current LTV under 60%. Their equity is almost half of the value of their house. I mean, if there's a crash and it goes down 20%, they still have a lot of equity. 91.2% of borrowers have LTVs under 80%, right? And see in bold there in this article, there will not be a huge wave of single-family foreclosures in this cycle. People just have too much equity, they have too good a credit score, and they have too good a deal to ever sell their homes. That's nothing like it was leading up to the Great Recession. Right now, 2% of the homes in the country are underwater, meaning they have negative equity. Great Recession, quite a bit different, okay? Right? Compared to what? Compared to this. 2% is not 26%. They're floating on the water now. It was 13 times worse than it is today. And look at this. Way back to the early 1980s, people had higher ratios of payment to income than they do now. So their payment to income ratio now is historically low, right? They have very, very comfortable payments. It was a little lower during the COVID era, but it's still historically low payments. So we have to get in the DeLorean and go back to the future. 10-year period between 2011 and 2021 will take the COVID era, right? The mortgage payment, 10 years before that, the median mortgage payment was $1,019. 10 years later, in the COVID era, people got a mortgage payment that was $18 less than that. They turned back the clock. And this is why they won't sell, because their mortgage is too good a deal. Look at the difference in the house price, though. Okay? The house price back then was only $225,000, and then it's $400,000, but their mortgage payment is cheaper. It's all the magic of those super low rates. But wait, there's more. Because in that 10-year period, according to the official CPI or CPI, right, the Consumer Price Index, inflation was almost 27%. So the cumulative inflation rate there with inflation-induced debt destruction, okay, means that the real payment today compared to 10 years earlier is only $730. Remember, they're paying the payment in cheaper dollars 10 years later because inflation has debased the value of the dollars. So the payment is cheaper. And the real house price adjusted for inflation is not $400,397. It's $290. This is who controls the inventory. All of these people with this deal. And that's why there's no flood of inventory. Look, what I always say on my show is there is one ingredient you absolutely, positively must have to have a real estate crash. Without this one ingredient, there can be no crash ever. And that is tens of millions of distressed homeowners who become millions of distressed home sellers. Now we have the exact opposite scenario of that. We have very, very comfortable people. Okay, got a couple more things before I wrap it up. So I read this book, Die with Zero, a couple of years ago. Anybody read it? Okay, it's not like the greatest book in the world, but it's just an interesting paradigm shift. And I want to just encourage everybody. And then I also interviewed Oliver Berkman on my show, who's the author of 4,000 Weeks, okay, which is the average human lifetime. And I just want to encourage people, because I had this big change in thinking, to encourage people, if you are at a level where you've invested right, or you know how to invest, and you have a business, and you know how to run a business, you know you can always make money, right? This whole idea of deferring gratification is very important in the beginning of your journey, because without delayed gratification, there can be no real wealth creation. You have to trade more pleasure today for a greater, brighter future. But here's the problem, and this is what the book enlightened me of. Most people do that way too long, okay? Guess what? We're all going to die, okay? So do enjoy your wealth along the way. And what that does is it sets up the psychology in your mind to know that it's abundant and you can create more at any time. So I just wanted to share that with you. And to that end, you are all invited, if you are an accredited investor, You may have seen our booth out there. We have a mastermind group called the Collective Inner Circle. And George and Ken and I, Ken McElroy, the next speaker, started this a few years ago. And then we merged with two great guys, Russell Gray and Robert Helms. So now we have 5 partners in the Collective Inner Circle, and our booth is right out there. And if you are a fit for this exclusive group, we are having a cocktail reception in the green room tonight. You can go get an invitation back at the booth there and check that out. And that's at 5 o'clock right after we end today. But I just wanted to show you one of the things I'm inviting the Collective Inner Circle on is I read Die with Zero, and I decided I need to start spending some more of my money. So I dropped $135,000 and chartered this beautiful yacht in Croatia. And I'll just show you the little video about that. So what this is this is a mastermind experience where you can keep it playing, but I'll just talk for a minute, where every day we'll mastermind for about 2 hours about investing, about business, about, if you're an influencer, about growing your audience, and about all these exciting things. And this is a nonprofit venture, okay? I'm not planning to make a penny off of this. I'm strictly inviting Collective Inner Circle people to just, anybody who wants to join and share the cost. I've got some other friends that are going too. I just encourage you, depending where you are in your journey, to start doing things like this, right? And it's much cheaper than buying a boat, because I used to own a boat, and that was really very, you know what boat stands for? How many of you have owned a boat? BOAT, bring on another 1,000, right? Everything that breaks on it is $1,000 minimum, It's ridiculous. But anyway, this is going to be a fun time. So if you're interested in joining us for the cocktail reception at 5 o'clock, go out to the booth or at the first break today. And also you can get your pins compared to what, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so I just want to close with a couple more ideas real quickly. I do have a little more time. So inflation versus deflation. What will the future hold? Well, I'm in the inflation camp. I think we are going to have a lot of inflation. Remember, I talked about following the business plan and aligning our interest with the 2 most powerful forces the world has ever known, governments and central banks. I guess above that is God, but, human forces, right? Governments and central banks. And there really is this big war going on in the inflation-deflation debate, because if you look at it maybe like a boxing match, okay, and you have in one corner over here, you have bad fiscal and monetary policy, right? And that is inflationary. We all know that. That is going to cause inflation. And in the other corner of the ring, you have technology. And technology is deflationary because it just keeps getting better. It keeps amazing us. I mean, the artificial intelligence revolution that we're seeing now is, in a year, it's just going to be amazing. Oh, we're all going to be dead and it's going to be Terminator 2. I don't know. It might go that way too. So anyway, enjoy yourself today and join us on the yacht. Okay. So this is the debate. Okay. Some people will argue, like Jeff Booth. He was on my show before. Okay. And he spoke at Mark Moss's event with me too. He would say, well, the future is deflationary because technology is going to, bring this utopia of lower prices and all this stuff. And, that's true. But the problem is technology, even though it evolves really quickly, it still has to go through evolution. One idea builds on the next idea, right? We all know that. But bad fiscal and monetary policy, the government spending, like Ronald Reagan said, right? The great quote, he says, to say the government spends like a drunken sailor would be an insult to drunken sailors, okay? And that's the way it is. And so they can inflate faster than technology can fix it, right? And these two things are constantly at war. And I think that ultimately, sadly, from a philosophical standpoint, they will win. They will create more inflation. But as an investor, using inflation-induced debt destruction, I love inflation because I borrow the money at today's dollars. I outsource the repayment of that borrowing to someone called a tenant. They pay the mortgage for me. Plus, they give me a little extra every month called positive cash flow. And then the government says, we'll give you a big tax write-off because you're providing housing. Okay, sounds good to me. I'll take that deal. And then as time goes on, I pay the debt back in cheaper dollars. Inflation-induced debt destruction. That is the magic hidden wealth creator of income property. Remember how I said at the beginning, if anybody talks to you about prices going up and going down and trying to time the market, first of all, market timers never seem to win. But if anybody talks to you about that, just remember, it is not a shallow game of one-dimensional investing. Buy low, sell high. It's buy low, sell high, get positive cash flow, get tax benefits, get leverage, get inflation-induced debt destruction, add value through creativity. There's so many ways you make money with income property, and that's why it is the most historically proven wealth creator in the entire world. So look at this. This is an inflationary sign for sure, right? Blue line generates income to pay interest on the debt, the red line. Right? And now, because our debt is so insane at $35 trillion, that's with a T, that every 100 days, just to service that problem, we spend another $1 trillion. So we're going to increase, without additional spending, that obligation by $3.65 trillion with a T dollars per year. And that is very inflationary. Now, what does the government do? Well, they use Jason Hartman's trademark technique, inflation-induced debt destruction. Because all the debt the government has to pay back to China or whomever, they keep getting a discount by inflating away the debt. Pat Buchanan was on my show years ago, the presidential candidate and author Pat Buchanan. And I explained this strategy to him. We were talking about it on the show, and he says, Jason, basically what real estate investors do is they get to inflate away their debt on a sea of inflation. I thought that was very poetic, the way he said that. Really good. Okay, so income property is ideal. That's the acronym because you have income, depreciation, equity growth, appreciation, leverage, and then the bonus one is mine, inflation-induced debt destruction. Now, this pro forma, one of the things I want to encourage all of you to do as real estate investors, and 21 years ago when I started investing nationwide, and that was a really, really good decision for me. When I did this, I was looking at so many deals, and it was so confusing because it seemed like every time I looked at a new property, I'd have to be a detective. Everybody would give me the numbers in different formats, and it just drove me out of my mind. So one of the things I learned to do is standardize my data. And that is one thing you must do. You must have data standardization so you can answer the question, life's most important question, which is, compared to what, right? That's what you need to do. So this pro forma is generated by a software that I actually bought a few years ago called Property Tracker, and it's totally free, okay? So just go to propertytracker.com. Right there, you can get this software totally free. There's no obligation. There's no strings attached, okay? Just get a free account there, and then you can do these pro formas like this in about 3 minutes, okay? It just takes no time at all to do them. But here's what I want to show you on this before I go. You have assumptions down here that show your cost, right? They show projected appreciation, vacancy rate, management fees, maintenance fees, all of this kind of stuff. And overall, because you have a multidimensional asset class, look at the bold thing where the green arrow is. The projected return on investment, and if you look at this, it's on our website at jasonhartman.com, of this very conservative property in Huntsville, Alabama, is 29% annually. Now you might think, oh gosh, that's so much hype. You're full of shit. No, not at all. It's a multidimensional asset class. You earn your return on investment in all these different ways. And that's why income property is the most historically proven asset class in the world, because it's multidimensional and you get your return in a lot of ways. As I always say, even if it only goes half as well as projected, what's half at 29%? 14.5%. You're going to be outperforming Bernie Madoff. and and you'll be in control of your own investment because you own it. You don't have some manager that can take the money off the top, where you're investing in a Wall Street asset or something like that. Okay.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.